You weren't supposed to hear it. Nobody in that office building was. A voice over a dusty old loudspeaker, crackling and urgent, slicing through the hum of copy machines and half-drunk coffee. Captain Serpent. Code red. Repeat. Code red. That was the message. And in that moment, everything she thought she'd buried came crashing back. If you believe that no matter how far you run, your past will always find you, then make sure to like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story, it's a reckoning. The day had started like any other. Quiet, unremarkable, almost painfully ordinary. Emily Carter, 28 years old, was standing in the break room at Preston Dynamics, pouring herself a cup of bitter, office-brand coffee. She wore a cardigan too soft for the fluorescent-lit walls, her hair tied back in a no-nonsense bun, the kind that said she had emails to send, deadlines to chase, and not nearly enough time for small talk. To anyone passing by, she was just another young professional trying to hold herself together in a sea of corporate sameness. She laughed politely at bad jokes, organized meetings with an efficiency her boss loved, and brought muffins on Fridays because she thought kindness was a currency still worth spending. But beneath that ordinary exterior, there was something else, something no one around her could have guessed. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence as Emily stirred sugar into her mug. A few coworkers drifted in, exchanging gossip about parking spaces and weekend plans. None of them paid attention when the speaker mounted above the microwave crackled alive, coughing out static before a voice, gravelly and sharp, delivered words that made Emily's heart stop. Captain Serpent. Code red. At first, the others laughed. One guy snorted into his soda. What is this, some kind of prank? Sounds like a cheap action movie. A woman rolled her eyes, muttering something about maintenance messing with the intercom again. To them, it was nothing. White noise. An interruption. But Emily didn't laugh. Her hand froze halfway to her lips, coffee steaming in the cup, her knuckles turning white around the porcelain handle. She swallowed hard, but her throat felt dry, parched like the desert air she once breathed on nights she'd promised never to think about again. Captain Serpent. No one in that room knew that name. No one in that room could have. It was a call sign sealed in classified files, erased from official rosters, a code name meant to vanish when she walked away 2 years ago. She had buried it so deeply under layers of normalcy that even she had begun to believe it didn't belong to her anymore. But here it was, dragged into the open by a voice from nowhere, louder than the hum of fluorescent lights, louder than her own heartbeat hammering in her chest. She set the mug down carefully, so carefully, because her hands were trembling. Nobody noticed. They were too busy debating whether the announcement was some kind of security drill. One man suggested maybe kids from the IT department were messing around. Another shrugged and said, whatever, not our problem. But for Emily, it was more than a problem. It was a summons. Her coworkers didn't see the way her jaw tightened, didn't catch the flicker of fear in her eyes, didn't notice how she glanced toward the door as though calculating her exit. They didn't know that the words code red weren't just noise. They were a trigger, a key, a command reserved for moments when everything was on the line. They didn't know that those 2 words were supposed to be impossible to hear here, in a quiet office break room, on an ordinary Tuesday morning. She hadn't been Captain Serpent for 2 years. 26 was young to retire from a world most people couldn't even imagine, but she had chosen to leave. Chosen to bury the weapons, the missions, the blood. She had chosen to build a life where the worst of her days were long meetings and printer jams. She had told herself she could do it. Fade into the background, become invisible, let the world forget her name. But the world hadn't forgotten. The announcement replayed once more, the voice low and distorted. Captain Serpent. Code red. Repeat. Code red. Then silence. A silence that felt heavier than the clink of coffee spoons or the rustle of paperbacks. Emily forced herself to breathe. In. Out. She had trained for this once. Trained to stay calm under pressure. To read every room. To notice every exit, every shadow. But that was years ago. Now, she was just Emily Carter, project coordinator, cardigan wearer, muffin bringer. Wasn't she? The ordinary world tugged at her, demanded she play along. A coworker nudged her shoulder lightly, chuckling. Guess somebody forgot to pay the tech guys. You look like you've seen a ghost. She managed a thin smile. Yeah, she said softly, her voice steadier than she felt. Something like that. Inside, though her thoughts raced. Why now? Why here? Who had triggered the call sign that was supposed to be locked away in vaults and whispers? If the system still worked, it meant the threat was real. And if the threat was real, then hiding behind a desk wouldn't save anyone. For a moment, she looked down at her reflection in the dark surface of the coffee. The woman staring back at her didn't look like Captain Serpent anymore. She looked tired, ordinary, human. But deep in her chest, something stirred. Something she had tried to smother with routines and meetings. A memory of who she once was, what she once swore to protect. Emily set the cup aside, untouched. Around her, the break room chatter moved on, everyone oblivious to the storm she felt building. She glanced at the clock on the wall. Each second ticked louder than the last, each one reminding her of a truth she didn't want to face. There was no walking away from this. Not anymore. She adjusted her cardigan, squared her shoulders, and gave one last look at the co-workers who would never understand why she suddenly seemed so far away. Then she stepped quietly toward the door. Not rushing, not panicked, just moving with purpose. The break room faded behind her, its stale coffee and fluorescent lights swallowed up by the weight of a past she could no longer outrun. Somewhere, beyond these walls, the world was calling for Captain Serpent again. And whether she was ready or not, Emily Carter would have to answer. Emily's footsteps echoed down the sterile hallway, the hum of fluorescent lights overhead masking the storm inside her chest. To her coworkers, she was probably just another employee ducking back to her desk, maybe off to make a phone call or grab files. No one gave her a second glance, and that invisibility, once a skill, now second nature, was the only gift she had left from her past. But as she pushed through the glass doors into the parking garage, that thin veneer of ordinary slipped away. The air here was colder, harsher. Concrete walls magnified each sound. The sharp click of her low heels against the floor, the faint drip of water from a leaking pipe, the distant rumble of cars above. And with every step deeper into the shadows, she felt it, the weight of who she had been. 2 years ago, she swore she would never come back to this. At 26, she'd walked away from a world of guns and encrypted signals, from the secrecy that had stolen pieces of her soul. She had wanted freedom. She had wanted to live like everyone else, to feel sunlight on her skin without wondering if she was being followed, to laugh at things that weren't calculated, to wake up without listening for a threat in the silence. And for a while, she had. She'd convinced herself the missions were behind her, buried in files marked, classified, and stamped with red ink. She had even convinced herself that Emily Carter, the polite, cardigan-wearing project coordinator, was all she'd ever been. But the voice on the loudspeaker had ripped through that lie. She stopped beside her silver sedan, keys trembling slightly in her grip. She glanced around. Habit, instinct, training. No one else was here. But still, her eyes scanned every corner, every shadow. She unlocked the trunk and lifted it slowly, as though exposing a secret she wasn't sure she wanted to face. Inside, tucked beneath the false lining of the trunk, was a case. Black, scuffed, unmistakable. Her heart clenched as her fingers traced the familiar grooves. She had kept it hidden, telling herself it was only for emergencies, telling herself she would never need it. But deep down, maybe she had always known. With a careful hand, she unlatched the case. The lid creaked open, revealing a life she had buried. A set of encrypted comms gear, an old headset, tactical gloves, and at the very bottom, a patch, a serpent coiled in a striking pose, embroidered in faded green. Captain Serpent, her past, staring back at her in silent judgment. Emily's breath caught. She lifted the patch, the fabric rough against her fingertips. How many nights had she sworn she'd never wear it again? How many promises had she made to herself that she would never slip back into that skin? But promises meant little when the world shifted. And the world had just shifted. She slipped the headset into place, the weight familiar and foreign all at once. The static filled her ear, broken only when she adjusted the frequency. Old muscle memory guiding her through the sequence. For a moment, nothing, just the hiss of dead air. Then, Captain Serpent. The voice was grizzled, heavy, like gravel dragged across steel. A voice she hadn't heard in years, yet one she could never forget. Emily's chest tightened. She hesitated. For so long, she had buried the name. Could she still wear it? Still own it? She swallowed. This is Captain Serpent. Go ahead. There was a pause, a silence heavy with recognition. Then the voice spoke again. It's been a long time. Too long. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel, though she wasn't even driving. What's the situation? The reply came sharp, urgent. Compromise. The signal wasn't supposed to reach you unless we were out of options. We're out of options. Emily closed her eyes briefly. The words pressed against her chest like a weight she didn't want to carry. You told me I was done. You told me I could walk away. We did. And we meant it. But this is bigger than any of us now. They're here, Carter. Closer than you think. Her pulse spiked. Closer than you think. She scanned the garage again, every shadow stretching longer, darker. For the first time in years, her instincts screamed that she wasn't alone. Give me specifics, she whispered, her voice low but steady. The comm crackled. Not here. Not open channel. Secure rendezvous in 30. Coordinates sent to your old drive. Emily's breath slowed. The training settling in like a switch had flipped. Fear was still there, but it had sharpened, focused. This was who she had been trained to be. This was Captain Serpent, calculating, disciplined, ready. She reached back into the case and pulled out the gloves, sliding them on. The fabric gripped her hand snugly, a reminder that she was stepping back into a world where mistakes weren't allowed. Her fingers brushed the serpent patch again. She hesitated, then peeled the backing, pressing it firmly onto the sleeve of her jacket. The weight of it was more than cloth and thread. It was memory, blood, sacrifice. It was every mission she had survived, every comrade she had lost, every shadow she had walked through. It was her past clawing its way back into her present. She exhaled slowly. Captain Serpent reporting, she said into the comm. Where do you need me? For a moment, the only sound was the low hiss of static. Then the voice came back, colder than before. We need you everywhere. Emily's jaw clenched. She closed the trunk, the slam echoing through the empty garage like a gunshot. Around her, the silence felt different now, not empty, but watchful. As she slid into the driver's seat, a thought pressed into her mind, heavier than all the gear she carried. This wasn't just about being called back. This wasn't just about answering an old signal. This was about something bigger, something that had been waiting, silently, for her return. And whether she wanted it or not, Captain Serpent was back. The night pressed in heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. Emily drove through streets she had traveled 100 times, but tonight they felt unfamiliar, each shadow deeper, each corner sharper. The GPS on her dash pointed her toward the rendezvous coordinates, but she didn't need it. Her body remembered the paths her mind had tried to forget. Every turn, every backstreet, was etched into her muscle memory, drilled into her by years of repetition. The location was a warehouse on the edge of town, the kind of place no one looked at twice. Abandoned, boarded windows, graffiti bleeding across the walls. To the untrained eye, it was just another relic of a forgotten economy. But Emily knew better. A safe house. One of the last. She parked 2 blocks away, slipping into the night on foot. Her sneakers whispered against the cracked pavement as she moved, posture low, eyes scanning every detail. The broken glass glittering in the gutter, the flicker of a faulty streetlight, the faint hum of electricity that shouldn't have been running in a building marked condemned. The serpent patch on her sleeve tugged at her, reminding her of the identity she'd stitched back onto her skin. She wasn't Emily Carter, cardigan-wearing project coordinator anymore. Not here. Not tonight. She was Captain Serpent. The comm in her ear hissed to life. Approach confirmed. You're late. Emily froze against the brick wall, eyes narrowing. That voice wasn't the grizzled handler from before. This one was younger, clipped, calculating. Late? She whispered back. I wasn't told there was a clock. You're always on the clock, the voice replied. Her stomach tightened. Something was wrong. Emily circled the warehouse perimeter, keeping low. Through a slit in the boarded windows, she saw it, movement. 3 figures inside, armed. Their weapons weren't military issue. Too clean, too polished. Mercenaries. Not her people. Her pulse hammered. Trap. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself. I see them, she murmured. The comm crackled again, the voice dripping with amusement now. Of course you do. That's why we used your name. We knew you couldn't resist. Her throat went dry. They had lured her here. Not her unit. Not her old command. But someone else entirely. Someone who knew the one thing that would drag Captain Serpent out of hiding. She slipped deeper into the shadows, her mind racing. Who were they? How did they know her code name? And why now, after all these years? She crouched low, pulling a small tactical knife from the case she'd strapped to her leg. No firearms tonight, not yet. A knife was quieter, cleaner. The mercenaries moved inside, their voices low but sharp. She caught fragments, package, delivery, extraction window. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't small. Emily pressed against the wall, breathing shallow. She could turn back, slip into her car, drive away, pretend she'd never heard the loudspeaker, never opened the trunk, never put on the patch. She could go back to being Emily Carter. But she didn't, because that wasn't who she was anymore. She moved. Silent. Precise. The first mercenary never saw her coming. A swift strike, the knife pressing just enough to quiet him, lowering him gently to the floor. She dragged his body into the shadows, heart pounding but movement steady. The second heard something. He turned. Too late. Emily was already behind him, the knife at his throat. She whispered, "Who sent you?" He smirked, even with steel against his skin. "You already know." And then, before she could press, a shot rang out. The man crumpled, blood spilling across the concrete. Emily spun, eyes darting to the source. The third mercenary stood with a pistol raised, smoke curling from the barrel. His expression was calm, almost casual. "Captain Serpent," he said, his voice carrying the weight of recognition. "You should have stayed dead." Her grip tightened on the knife. "Who are you?" He tilted his head, lips curling into a smile. "The one who remembers what you did, and the one who's going to finish it." Before she could move, the calm in her ear erupted again, this time not with taunts, but with the gravelly voice she remembered. Her handler, desperate, strained. "Emily, get out of there. It's compromised." Static swallowed his words. The mercenary's smile widened. "Looks like you're out of friends." Emily's mind raced. Whoever these men were, they had infiltrated channels she thought untouchable. They had used her own past against her, dragged her into the open. And now, they wanted her alive, or dead, for reasons she didn't yet understand. But she didn't freeze. She didn't falter. She had been trained for worse. The standoff stretched, air thick with tension, the silence heavier than the gun pointed at her chest. Then Emily spoke, her voice steady, low, filled with a steel she hadn't touched in years. "You wanted Captain Serpent," she said, taking a step forward. "You got her." And then, the fight began. The mercenary fired, but Emily moved faster, throwing the knife, closing the distance, turning the warehouse into chaos. The past she had buried wasn't just knocking anymore. It had kicked the door down. And as the echoes of battle filled the dark, one truth cut sharper than any blade. Captain Serpent wasn't gone. She had only been waiting.